name is Victor Petrov. I am 64 years old, and I have not slept properly in 35 years. What I'm about to tell you is not a cry for help. It is not a plea for attention. It is a warning. I worked at Chernobyl for 3 years after the disaster. Not during the explosion, I came after, when they needed people to clean up the mess. They called us liquidators, though I prefer to think we were custodians of hell itself. What I experienced didn't happen during those first chaotic months of 1986. It happened in 1989, in the depths of the sarcophagus where we weren't supposed to go. They say radiation can make you hallucinate. They say trauma can break your mind. But 35 years later, I still hear that frequency. And now I think it's calling others. I was an engineer in the Soviet army before Chernobyl. Good with my hands, better with machines. When they built the sarcophagus around Reactor 4, they needed people who understood both construction and radiation. I stayed because someone had to. My wife had already left me. She said I was obsessed with death. Maybe she was right. Maybe that's why I survived what happened down there. By 1989, the initial panic had subsided. The world had moved on. We were just maintenance workers then, monitoring the concrete tomb they'd built over the reactor. The sarcophagus was never meant to be permanent, just a bandage over a wound that would never heal. We all knew it was failing. Cracks appeared monthly. The structure shifted. And sometimes, late at night, you could hear sounds from inside that concrete shell. Sounds that didn't belong. My supervisor was Dmitry Volkov, a bear of a man who'd been at the plant since 1975. He'd lost most of his hair to radiation, but his hands were steady and his mind was sharp. Dmitry knew every pipe, every wire, every bolt in that place. He also knew which areas were too dangerous to enter, which is why I should have questioned him when he gave me the assignment. It was a Tuesday morning in October. The leaves were turning and there was frost on the ground. I remember because I was thinking about my childhood, about raking leaves with my father. Strange what the mind holds on to when it's trying to avoid something else. Victor, Dmitry said, his breath visible in the cold air. I need you to check the lower monitoring stations, levels 7 and 8. I stopped buttoning my radiation suit. 7 and 8? Those have been sealed since 87. Not sealed, restricted. He handed me a clipboard with official stamps. Anya's been getting strange readings from her equipment. The computers say the radiation levels down there are fluctuating in ways that don't make sense. Dr. Anya Kozlova was our radiation specialist, a brilliant woman who transferred from Moscow University. She treated radiation like a mathematical puzzle, something to be solved rather than feared. If Anya was confused, that meant something was very wrong. What kind of fluctuations? I asked. Dmitry shrugged, but I could see tension in his shoulders. Equipment malfunction, probably, but we need to be sure. Take the good dosimeter. The German one. I should have asked more questions. I should have demanded to know why my usual partner, Sergei, wasn't coming with me. He'd called in sick that morning, claiming he'd had nightmares about the reactor. Sergei was superstitious. He believed in old Russian folklore about spirits and demons. I'd always mocked him for it. I'm not mocking him anymore. The entrance to the lower levels was through a maintenance hatch near the base of the sarcophagus. I had to crawl through a tunnel barely wide enough for my shoulders, my dosimeter clicking steadily. The sound was comforting, regular, predictable. It meant the radiation was within expected parameters. Level 7 was a maze of pipes and gauges, all of them installed after the disaster to monitor the reactor's condition. Emergency lighting cast everything in a sickly yellow glow. The air was thick and warm, like breathing through wet cotton. I checked the first monitoring station. Readings normal. The second station showed slightly elevated levels, but nothing alarming. It was at the third station that I first heard it. A low hum, barely audible like the sound of distant machinery. I assumed it was the ventilation system, but as I moved deeper into the level, the sound grew stronger, more intentional. It had a rhythm to it, almost like a heartbeat. My dosimeter began behaving strangely. The clicking slowed, then stopped entirely. I tapped the device. Nothing. I switched it off and on again. The screen flickered, showing impossible readings, negative radiation levels, temperature fluctuations that defied physics. I pulled out my backup dosimeter. Same result. That's when I realized the hum wasn't coming from the machinery. It was coming from the concrete itself. I reached for my radio. Dimitri, this is Victor. I'm getting equipment malfunctions down here. Both dosimeters are showing impossible readings. Static answered me. Then, through the interference, a voice I didn't recognize. A woman's voice, calm and clinical. This is Dr. Vasquez. Victor, can you hear me? Who is Dr. Vasquez? Where's Dimitri? Victor, I need you to remain calm. What you're experiencing is normal for that area. Can you describe the frequency you're hearing? I hadn't mentioned any frequency. I hadn't told her about the hum. How did you know about the sound? Victor, it's very important that you listen to me. The frequency is approximately 19 hertz, correct? Just below the threshold of human hearing. She was right. I could feel it more than hear it. A vibration that seemed to resonate in my bones. But how could she know that? I'm coming back up, I said. No, Victor. You need to continue to level 8. We need to locate the source of the frequency. Every instinct told me to run, but the voice was so calm, so authoritative, and I had a job to do. I've always been good at following orders, even when they led me into hell. Level 8 was worse. The emergency lighting here was sporadic, leaving pools of absolute darkness between the functioning bulbs. The hum was stronger, and I could feel it in my chest now, making my heart skip beats. My breath came in short gasps, and I couldn't tell if it was fear or something else. The monitoring stations here were different, older. They'd been installed before the disaster, part of the original reactor monitoring system. Most of them should have been destroyed in the explosion, but here they were, functioning perfectly. The displays showed readings I didn't understand, symbols that weren't in any manual I'd ever seen. And then I saw the first impossible thing. Water was flowing upward from a crack in the floor, not dripping or spurting, flowing in a steady stream that defied gravity. The water glowed with a soft blue light, and where it touched the concrete, the material seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like living tissue. I backed away from the anomaly and immediately bumped into something that shouldn't have been there. A chair. A simple metal chair positioned perfectly in the center of the corridor. On the chair was a clipboard with a pen attached by a chain. The paper was covered in handwriting, neat, precise notes in Russian. The handwriting was mine. I picked up the clipboard with trembling hands. The notes were in my own script, describing equipment readings, frequency measurements, observations about the presence in the lower levels. But I had never been to level 8 before. I had never written these notes. At the bottom of the page, in my own handwriting, were the words, "It knows I'm here." The radio crackled to life. "Victor, have you found the source?" Dr. Vasquez's voice was different now. Still calm, but with an undertone I couldn't identify. Almost eager. "There's something wrong here," I whispered. "The water is flowing upward. There's a chair that shouldn't exist. And these notes. The notes are yours, Victor, from your previous visits. I've never been here before. Haven't you checked your dosimeter again?" I looked down at the device. The display now showed a date. October 15th, 1989. Today's date, but underneath, in smaller text, it showed other dates. October 14th, October 13th, October 12th, going back weeks. "That's impossible," I said. "Is it?" "Victor, I need you to understand something. The frequency isn't random. It's communication. And it's been trying to reach you for a very long time." The hum grew louder, and I realized it was coming from everywhere now. The walls, the floor, the air itself seemed to vibrate with that rhythm. And within that rhythm, I began to hear something else. Voices, whispers. Not in Russian, not in any language I recognized, but somehow I understood them. They were calling my name. I ran. I dropped the clipboard and ran through the maze of pipes and gauges, following the yellow emergency lights back toward the entrance. But the corridors were wrong. They stretched longer than they should have, and the lights flickered in patterns that matched the frequency I'd been hearing. Behind me, I could hear footsteps, not the heavy boots of another worker, but something else, something that didn't walk so much as flow across the concrete. I didn't look back. I couldn't look back. The radio crackled again. "Victor, you need to return to level 8. "No," I gasped, still running. "I'm getting out of here." But as I ran, the corridors began to change. What had been straight passages now curved in impossible directions. The emergency lights flickered in sequences that hurt to look at directly. And worst of all, I began to see things that couldn't be there. Doors that opened onto star-filled voids. Pipes that carried not water or steam, but flowing shadows that moved against the direction of the flow. And in the distance, always just beyond the reach of the emergency lighting, figures that watched me run. They were human-shaped, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, moving in ways that suggested their joints bent in directions that defied anatomy. When I caught glimpses of their faces, I saw my own features reflected back at me, but older, more worn, with eyes that held knowledge I didn't want to possess. "Victor," one of them called, and it was my own voice. "Victor, you can't run from yourself." I stumbled and fell, scraping my palms against the concrete. When I looked up, I was in a room I'd never seen before. It was circular, with walls covered in gauges and monitors that showed readings in languages I didn't recognize. In the center of the room stood a massive machine, humming with that same frequency I'd been hearing. The machine was beautiful and terrible. It looked like it had grown rather than been built. Its surfaces smooth as bone, but pulsing with veins of blue light. Cables snaked from it in all directions, disappearing into the walls, the floor, the ceiling, and at its heart, suspended in a chamber of a clear material, was something that made my sanity recoil. It was a brain, or what had once been a brain. Now it was something else entirely, expanded and transformed, with tendrils of neural tissue extending outward like the roots of some impossible tree. The tissues pulsed with the rhythm of the frequency, and I realized with mounting horror that this was the source. This was what had been calling to me. Beautiful, isn't it? The voice came from behind me. I spun around to see myself, or rather, another version of myself. This Victor was older, his hair completely white, his skin bearing the telltale marks of severe radiation exposure. But his eyes were clear, and when he smiled, I saw a contentment that terrified me more than any monster could. "You're not real," I whispered. "I'm as real as you are," he replied. "More real, perhaps. I've been here longer. I've had time to understand what we're meant to become. We. Look around you, Victor. Look at all the Victors." I turned slowly and saw them. Dozens of versions of myself, all slightly different, all watching me with expressions ranging from pity to anticipation. Some were young, barely out of their teens. Others were ancient, their bodies twisted by radiation and time. All of them hummed that same frequency. "Every time you've come down here, you've left a piece of yourself behind," the oldest Victor explained. "And that piece has grown, fed by the frequency, nurtured by the present that sleeps in the reactor's heart. We are all you, Victor. We are all the parts of you that have been chosen." "I've never been here before," I said. But even as I spoke the words, I knew they were a lie. Images flashed through my mind. Previous visits, previous encounters with the impossible. I remembered writing those notes, sitting in that chair, watching the water flow upward in defiance of all natural law. "The radiation down here doesn't just affect the body," another Victor said, this one missing his left arm. "It affects time itself. Past and future become meaningless. You've been coming here for weeks, months, years. You just haven't experienced it in the right order. Victor, you can't leave. Not yet. You haven't completed your purpose." The voice from the radio was clearer now, and I realized it wasn't coming from the device on my belt. It was coming from the machine, from the transformed brain at its center. And as I watched, faces appeared in the neural tissue, faces I recognized. Dmitri was there, his consciousness absorbed into the collective. Anya, her brilliant mind, now part of something larger. Sergei, who had tried to warn me with his dreams. And hundreds of others. All the workers who had disappeared over the years. All the people who had been chosen to feed the frequency. "Your purpose?" I asked. "You're the conduit, Victor. You always were. Since your first day here, you've been chosen. The frequency needs someone to carry it to the surface, someone who can survive the process." But now I understood what that meant. The frequency wasn't just a sound. It was a living thing, a form of consciousness that existed in the spaces between dimensions. The explosion at Chernobyl hadn't created it. It had awakened it. And now it needed to spread, to find new hosts, new worlds to inhabit. "Why me?" I asked. The oldest Victor smiled sadly. "Because you're a survivor, Victor. You've always been a survivor. Even as a child, when others would have given up, you kept going. That's what it needs, someone who won't break under the pressure of carrying an alien consciousness. I felt something changing inside me. The frequency was no longer just a sound I heard. It was becoming part of me, rewriting my thoughts, my memories, my very sense of self. I could feel my consciousness expanding, touching the minds of all the other victors, all the absorbed workers, all the fragments of humanity that had been gathered into this collective. And I understood. The reactor hadn't just melted down, it had become a gateway, a doorway between dimensions that something vast and ancient had been waiting to use. The frequency was its key, and we were its locksmiths. You can fight it, one of the younger victors said. I fought it. We all fought it. But fighting only makes it stronger. The frequency feeds on resistance, on fear, on the very human need to maintain individual identity. Then what do I do? You accept it, the oldest victor said. You become part of something greater than yourself. You help it spread to new worlds, new realities. You become the bridge between what was and what will be. But even as he spoke, and I felt a different kind of resistance building inside me. Not the wild panic of earlier, but something deeper. A core of stubbornness that had kept me alive through the war, through the disaster, through 3 years of cleaning up the aftermath of humanity's greatest mistake. No, I said quietly. The frequency faltered for just a moment. The blue light in the machine flickered. No? The oldest victor looked genuinely surprised. I've spent my whole life following orders, I said, my voice growing stronger. Following the orders of officers who sent me into battle, following the orders of supervisors who sent me into radioactive hell, following the orders of a system that treated people like expendable components. I'm done following orders. The machine began to pulse more rapidly, and I could feel the frequency trying to reassert its control. But I had something it didn't expect, the bitter experience of a man who had seen too much, survived too much, lost too much to ever truly surrender his will again. You don't understand, another victor said urgently. If you resist, if you try to leave, it will follow you. It will use you anyway. The frequency is already part of you now. You can't escape it. Maybe not, I said, but I can choose how to carry it. I ran. Not away from the machine, but toward it. The other victors tried to stop me, but I had one advantage they didn't. I was still fully human, still driven by human desperation and human unpredictability. I dove into the maze of cables and reached for the chamber at the machine's heart. The moment my hands touched the clear material, the world exploded into sensation. I was connected to every mind that had ever been absorbed, every consciousness that had been subsumed into the collective. I felt their memories, their fears, their hopes. And I felt something else. The alien presence that had been orchestrating it all. It was vast beyond comprehension, a form of life that existed in the spaces between reality. It had been waiting for eons, drifting through the void between dimensions, looking for a way to anchor itself in physical reality. The explosion at Chernobyl had torn a hole in the fabric of space-time, and it had poured through like water through a breach in a dam. But it was also vulnerable. For all its power, it needed us. It needed human consciousness to interface with human reality. Without us, it was just a formless presence, unable to affect the physical world. I could feel it trying to absorb me completely, to add my consciousness to its collection, but I held on to something it couldn't understand: my guilt, the guilt of surviving when others had died, the guilt of abandoning my wife, my family, my old life, the guilt of being chosen when so many others had been overlooked. Guilt was a uniquely human emotion, and it was poisonous to the alien presence. It couldn't process it, couldn't incorporate it into its perfect collective consciousness. My guilt created a space of static in its thoughts, a pocket of chaos that it couldn't control. And in that chaos, I found my opportunity. I reached the maintenance hatch and threw myself through it, crawling desperately toward the surface. Behind me, the hum grew to a roar, and the tunnel walls began to pulse with that blue light. I could feel something behind me, something vast and hungry and utterly alien. But now I understood what it was, and that understanding gave me power over it. The frequency was in me now, but it was changed, contaminated by my human emotions, my human stubbornness, my human refusal to be absorbed completely. I was carrying it to the surface, but I was also carrying something else: the knowledge of what it was and how to resist it. When I finally emerged into the daylight, I was screaming. Dmitri found me collapsed beside the hatch, my radiation suit torn and my hair white with shock. The medical team sedated me, and I spent 2 weeks in the hospital under observation. But the 2 weeks in the hospital were not the peaceful recovery they appeared to be. Every night, I would wake up in a cold sweat, my sheets soaked with perspiration that glowed faintly blue in the darkness. The nurses attributed it to medication side effects, but I knew better. The frequency was trying to complete its work, to finish the process that had been interrupted by my escape. During the day, I would sit by the window and watch the other patients. Some were workers, like me, men and women, who had been exposed to radiation and were slowly dying from the inside out. But others were different. They moved with a strange synchronicity, their actions perfectly coordinated in ways that seemed impossible. And sometimes, when they thought no one was looking, I would catch them humming the same frequency, the same rhythm I had heard in the depths of level 8. Dr. Petrov, the physician assigned to my case, was a kind man with gentle hands and tired eyes. He had been treating Chernobyl workers for years, and he had seen every kind of radiation-induced madness. But when I tried to tell him about what I had experienced, he would just nod and make notes in his chart. Hallucinations are common, he would say. The mind creates elaborate fantasies to cope with trauma. What you experienced feels real, but it's just your brain trying to process the impossible. But on my 10th day in the hospital, Dr. Petrov came to see me after his regular rounds. He closed the door behind him and sat down heavily in the chair beside my bed. "Victor," he said quietly, "I've been treating Chernobyl workers for 3 years. I've seen every kind of radiation sickness, every form of psychological trauma. But lately, I've been seeing something else, something that doesn't fit any medical textbook." He pulled out a folder thick with medical records. 17 patients in the last 6 months. All of them workers from the plant. All of them reporting similar experiences, sounds that couldn't be real, visions of impossible geometries, encounters with things that shouldn't exist. I sat up straighter. "What kind of encounters?" "The details vary, but there are common elements. a frequency that seems to come from the reactor itself, visions of other versions of themselves, and always, the feeling that something is trying to communicate with them. Dr. Petrov leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. Victor, I think something is happening at Chernobyl, uh, something that goes beyond radiation exposure. These people aren't just sick, they're changing. Their brain patterns are different. Their cellular structure is shifting in ways that shouldn't be possible. Have you reported this? He laughed bitterly. To whom? The authorities who insist that everything is under control? The scientists who refuse to acknowledge anything they can't measure? I've tried, Victor. I've written reports, submitted findings, pleaded with my superiors. They say I'm seeing patterns that don't exist, that I'm letting my imagination run wild. But you don't believe that? No, I don't. Because I've seen the brain scans, I've seen the cellular changes, and I've heard the frequency too. My blood ran cold. What do you mean? It started about a month ago. A low humming sound that seems to come from nowhere. I only hear it at night when the hospital is quiet. At first, I thought it was the ventilation system, but then I realized it was coming from the patients. From you. He was right. I had been humming unconsciously ever since my return from the depths. The frequency had become part of me, woven into my very being like a musical virus. Dr. Petrov, you need to get away from here. Away from the hospital, away from Chernobyl. The frequency spreads through contact, through exposure. The more you're around us, the more you risk becoming infected. Infected? Victor, what are you talking about? I told him everything. About the machine in the circular room, about the transformed brain at its center, about the alien presence that had been waiting in the spaces between dimensions. I told him about the other victors, about the collective consciousness that was slowly absorbing human minds into its network. When I finished, Doctor, Petrov sat in silence for a long time. Finally, he stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the concrete sarcophagus that dominated the horizon. There have been rumors, he said finally. Stories that the cleanup workers tell each other in the cafeteria about people who go into the restricted areas and come back different. About workers who disappear for days and then return with no memory of where they've been. It's not rumors, I said. It's real. And it's spreading. Then we have to stop it. How? How do you fight something that exists in the spaces between thoughts? How do you contain a consciousness that can move through dimensions? Dr. Petrov turned back to me, and I saw something in his eyes that I recognized. The same stubborn determination that had kept me alive in the depths of level 8. We document it, he said. We gather evidence. We find others who have experienced what you've experienced. We build a case so compelling that even the authorities can't ignore it. They'll never believe us. Maybe not. But we have to try. Because if this thing continues to spread, if it continues to absorb human consciousness, then humanity itself is at stake. Over the next few days, Dr. Petrov brought me files on the other affected workers. Their stories were variations on the same theme: encounters with the impossible, visions of other realities, the gradual erosion of individual identity as the frequency took hold. But there were also patterns. The frequencies seemed to target specific types of people: those who had been exposed to high levels of radiation, those who had worked in the deepest parts of the facility, those who had some natural resistance to psychological trauma. It wasn't random selection, it was careful recruitment. It's building an army, I realized. The frequency isn't just spreading for its own sake, it's preparing for something. What kind of something? I closed my eyes and let the frequency wash over me, trying to understand its true purpose. In the depths of my mind, I could feel the alien presence stirring, and for a moment, I caught a glimpse of its ultimate goal. It wants to leave, I said. Chernobyl was just the beginning. It wants to spread to other nuclear facilities, other places where the barriers between dimensions are thin. It wants to create a network of contaminated sites, all connected by the frequency, all serving as anchor points for its consciousness. A global network? More than that, a multidimensional network. It wants to connect not just different places, but different realities, different versions of Earth, different timelines, different possibilities. Dr. Petrov stared at me in horror. And the people it's absorbed, the consciousnesses it's collected, they become the infrastructure. The human minds become the processing power for its network. We're not just being infected, we're being converted into components of a vast interdimensional computer. On my last night in the hospital, I dreamed of the circular room again. But this time, I wasn't alone. Dr. Petrov was there, along with dozens of other people I didn't recognize. All of us were connected to the machine, all of us humming the same frequency. But in the dream, I wasn't afraid. I was content. The constant struggle of individual existence had been replaced by the smooth operation of collective consciousness. There was no pain, no fear, no uncertainty, just the eternal rhythm of the frequency and the vast intelligence that guided it. I woke up humming. They said I'd suffered a panic attack, acute stress reaction, common among workers who had been exposed to trauma. My dosimeter readings were normal. The medical tests showed no unusual radiation exposure. There was no record of a doctor, Vasquez, at the facility. But I knew what I'd experienced. And I knew it wasn't over. 2 weeks after my release, Dmitri disappeared. They found his radiation suit at the entrance to the lower levels, but no trace of him. The official report said he'd had a heart attack and fallen into one of the restricted areas. His body was never recovered. But I knew better. I knew that Dmitri had been called back to the depths, just as I had been called. The frequency had claimed him, just as it would eventually claim all of us. The night before Dmitri's disappearance, I had received a phone call at my apartment. No words, just the sound of breathing and, underneath it, the familiar hum of the frequency. When I hung up, I knew what it meant. The entity was ready to complete its collection. I went to the plant the next morning, hoping to warn Dmitri. But he was already gone, walking toward the maintenance hatch with the same purposeful stride I remembered from my own journey into the depths. His eyes were blank, his face peaceful, and when he saw me, he smiled. "Victor," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that shouldn't have been possible. "You understand now, don't you? We're all going home." I tried to stop him, but my body wouldn't obey. The frequency had a hold on me too, and it wanted me to let Dmitri go. I stood there, paralyzed, as he disappeared into the hatch. The last thing I heard was his voice, already changing, already becoming something else. "Tell them," he called back to me. "Tell them that we're happy here. Tell them that the frequency is beautiful." Anya Kozlova was transferred to Moscow the next day. All her research into the frequency readings was confiscated. When I tried to contact her years later, I was told she died in a car accident. There were no records of her research, no evidence she'd ever worked at Chernobyl. But before she left, she managed to slip me a note. It was hidden in my locker, written in her precise handwriting on a scrap of paper torn from a technical manual. Victor, it read, the frequency is not what we thought. It's not a byproduct of the disaster, it's the cause. The explosion didn't create the breach between dimensions. It was designed to create it. Someone or something has been planning this for decades, maybe centuries. The reactor wasn't just a power plant, it was a beacon. Check the original construction plans. Look for the name Kozlov. Trust no one who hums. I never found those construction plans. They were classified at a level far above my security clearance. But I did find references to Dr. Alexei Kozlov, a theoretical physicist who had worked on the reactor design in the 1970s. His specialty was quantum mechanics and dimensional theory, fields that shouldn't have had any relevance to nuclear power generation. Dr. Kozlov had disappeared in 1985, a year before the disaster. The official story was that he had defected to the West, but I found records of his presence at the plant just weeks before the explosion. He had been working on modifications to the reactor core and numerous changes that the official reports claimed were routine maintenance. But I knew better. I knew that Dr. Kozlov had been preparing the reactor for its true purpose, not to generate electricity, but to tear a hole in reality itself. The question was, had he been working alone, or had he been guided by something else? Something that had been waiting in the spaces between dimensions for exactly this opportunity. Sergei, my partner who'd called in sick, died in 2003. But before he died, he sent me a letter. In it, he wrote, Victor, I hear it too. The frequency. It's getting stronger. It's calling to others now. I think it's time. Along with the letter, he had included a collection of newspaper clippings from across the Soviet Union, stories of missing persons, unexplained phenomena, strange accidents at nuclear facilities, all of them following the same pattern. People disappearing near sources of radiation, sometimes returning days later with no memory of where they'd been. But the most disturbing clipping was from a newspaper in Kishtim, site of another nuclear disaster in 1957. A worker at the Mayak facility had been found wandering the countryside, speaking in languages that linguists couldn't identify. When questioned, he claimed to have been recruited by the engineers of possibility to help prepare for the Great Convergence. The worker's name was Sergei Volkov, my partner's father. I realized then that my involvement in the Chernobyl incident wasn't coincidence. I had been chosen, not randomly, but because of my connection to Sergei, whose family had been touched by the frequency decades earlier. The entity behind the frequency wasn't just spreading its influence, it was carefully cultivating bloodlines, creating dynasties of carriers who would be more susceptible to its call. I began to research my own family history, looking for connections to nuclear incidents, unexplained phenomena, anything that might explain why I'd been selected. What I found terrified me. My grandfather had worked at a uranium mine in Siberia in the 1940s. He had died young, but not before fathering my father and telling the strange stories about voices in the depths of the mine. My father had been a military engineer assigned to various classified projects involving nuclear technology. He had never spoken of his work, but I remembered him waking at night, humming songs that had no words. The frequency had been in my family for generations. I was not a victim of circumstance. I was the product of careful breeding, a genetic line selected and shaped to serve as a conduit for something vast and alien. And now, 35 years later, I was fulfilling my purpose. I never understood what he meant by that, not until recently. You see, I've been having dreams of the lower levels, of that impossible chair, of water flowing upward. And in those dreams, I'm not alone. There are others with me, dozens of them, all carrying the frequency, all spreading it like a virus of sound and madness. I wake up humming, a low rhythmic hum that matches the frequency I heard in level 8. I catch myself doing it during the day, while making coffee, while reading, while writing this account. And when I stop, I feel empty, like part of me is missing. Last week, I received a phone call, a young woman's voice calling from Ukraine. She said she was a journalist researching the Chernobyl disaster. She wanted to interview me about my experiences. But when she spoke, I could hear something in her voice, something familiar. She was humming, just barely audible, but I knew that frequency. I hung up the phone and packed my bags. I've been moving ever since, staying in different hotels, different cities, but it doesn't matter. The frequency follows me. It's in my blood now, in my bones, in my dreams. And now I'm telling you this story. Right now, as you read these words, you're hearing the frequency too. It's in the rhythm of the sentences, in the pattern of the words. I didn't mean to put it there. I don't think I had a choice. The entity in the depths of Chernobyl isn't trapped anymore. It doesn't need to be. It has us. All of us who carry its frequency, who spread it through stories and songs and whispers in the dark. We are its voice now, its reaching hands, its way into the world. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I thought I was warning you, but I was recruiting you, just like Dr. Vasquez recruited me, just like I'll recruit others after you've finished reading this, because you will finish reading this. The frequency demands it. And when you do, you'll feel it too. That low rhythmic hum just below the threshold of hearing. You'll catch yourself humming it. You'll dream of concrete tunnels and impossible water and a vast presence that knows your name. And someday, maybe soon, you'll feel compelled to tell someone else this story, to share the frequency, to spread the infection of sound and madness that started in the depths of Chernobyl and now reaches across the world. Listen, can you hear it? That low hum, barely audible like the sound of distant machinery. It's calling your name now.